Welcome to the Investor Empowerment Series radio show, empowering your real estate investing with techniques, opportunities, and information, minus the BS and sales pitches. Now, please welcome the host of the Investor Empowerment Series, Joe Mueller, from the Tough as Nails Investment Syndicate, Joe Mueller.
Today on the Investor Empowerment Radio Show, we've got special guest Dan Clarton of Riverside Hope, as well as Chicagoland WholesaleHouses.com. Dan's main focus is wholesaling, fix and flipping in the Chicago area, as well as building a rental portfolio. Dan quit his job 5 years ago to focus on real estate investing. This is an awesome show with a ton of great information. Stay tuned in.
Please take a moment to hear from our featured sponsors.
Today's episode is sponsored by Jordan Capital Finance, offering lucrative rates on fix and flip line of credit loans, as well as opportunities for buy and hold investors. Please visit tanisgroupllc.com/funding for more information. Pathway Financial offers 0% interest on unsecured lines of credit loans for all types of real estate investing. Please visit tanisgroupllc.com/funding for more information. So Dan, thanks for coming on the show today. Why don't you take a minute to tell us a little bit more about how you got started in real estate?
First of all, thanks for having me. How I got started in real estate is, like a lot of things in my life, kind of by accident. I actually was drawn into one of those stadium-style motivational, get-motivated things that I think was run by James Smith Company in the past. And I didn't really understand the dynamics of how that worked at the time, but it was down at the United Center in Chicago, and they had Terry Bradshaw there, Mayor Rudy Giuliani, and so there was quite a few, big-name people that were interweaved between the segments of talking about, real estate and stock. And so they were offering a bunch of classes, and now looking in the rearview mirror, I see it for what it was. It was just really a big funnel to, bring people into the different educational programs. But, I guess everyone's got to get started somewhere, so that was as good a place as any to start for me. That was back in 2011.
Okay. And then what did that lead to?
So that led to going to a couple of 3-day boot camps, and one of the things I found about that is that while the information was really good looking back in retrospect, it was like drinking through a fire hose, and all the information that makes sense, but if you're not in the trenches, you're not actually involved in doing the things they're talking about, it doesn't really connect until you start doing things and you think back, you go, oh yeah, I remember a guy talking about these kinds of situations. So by actually taking action on the things that you learn about, that's when you see it kind of coming together.
Okay. So why don't you tell us a little bit more specifically about what you're doing now?
So now I'm doing a variety of things. I started out doing wholesaling, and I think that, a lot of times that's positioned as the gateway drug to real estate. I'm also aware that most of the people that are positioning wholesaling as a place to get started and it's easy money and anybody can do it, I find that's where most people water out, because the fact of the matter is, like anything worthwhile in life, nothing's easy, and it takes hard work, tenacity, and a determination of, I'm going to do what I got to do to get this thing done. And I got to a point where I put my fist down and I go, that's it, I'm going to make this happen. And it was when I made that decision that I found some things changing in my business. From that to doing some full-scale gut rehab flips in the city of Chicago. And now I'm most interested in building a rental portfolio.
Cool. So for the listeners that might not know what it is, can you talk a little bit about what wholesaling is specifically?
Yeah, wholesaling is kind of a tricky subject because there's what we affectionately, call it among insiders or with other investors. We talk about wholesaling. Essentially, in most cases, what we're doing is not actual wholesaling, but we're signing contracts. Mm-hmm. So essentially, I'm on the hunt always for people looking to sell a house, and we're looking for people with an element of motivation. Motivation is when there is an event coming pressed against time, and that creates the motivation. Mm-hmm. And, if there's no motivation, there's not going to be a deal necessarily. So, we try to find these types of deals, put them under contract, And then we, of course, we're in communication and network with a lot of other investors that are looking for fix and flip and or cash flow properties. And oftentimes we'll take that contract and assign it to them, and they can take it to closing, and there's a little spread in the middle to make a little money.
So you're making the spread in the middle between the first contract and whatever you're selling the second contract for.
I am. And sometimes, God willing, if there's a real big spread, then we do a double close. So that would actually be true wholesaling, where we actually close on the property, own it for a period of time, whether it be an hour or a day, and then resell it to somebody else. And when you do that, then you have two complete closings. But it insulates the profit, and the seller doesn't necessarily need to know what you're making, and neither does the buyer, because if you try to... Well, I've never done it, but if I was going to try to assign somebody a contract where I was going to make $40,000, that might not go well. Like, they would think it was a great deal. They'd love the deal. The numbers would work for them, and everything would be great until they found out how much I was making, and then all of a sudden they wouldn't be happy anymore.
So that was kind of my next question, because it sounds like you had mentioned there's a lot of investors that are getting started by maybe going to some type of educational piece, or maybe they see a webinar online and they're curious about wholesaling, so they figure out what it is. They start to maybe put up some bandit signs, or they hear about direct mail, which is one of the bigger key, I think, elements of wholesaling from what I know of it. Can you maybe give us a specific example on an actual deal that you worked through?
Sure.
Like the steps of the process, so maybe the listener can understand exactly what a wholesale deal entails from start to finish. So, starting with, let's say, a bandit sign call or a direct letter piece that they might get in the mail, and how that end works too, so they can understand it in full.
I'm going to use an example where the sellers were actually educated. Oftentimes people think, or mistakenly think, that people that are willing to sell a house at a wholesale price are uneducated and they don't know any better. They don't know what the opportunity that they could have. They don't have money, or they desperately need money. And that's not always the case. I'll tell you a story of a house that I got a phone call from a roadside bandit sign. They gave me the address of the property, and I looked it up while we were talking to see that it had been listed. And it was a property on a lake. And it was not the kind of lake where you can have a power boat, but it was a residential lake where you could have a little paddle boat and a kayak and maybe a pontoon boat at best, right? Mm-hmm. And I noticed that the house went on the market in the spring for $299,000. Mm-hmm. And then 4th of July weekend, they dropped it to like $275,000. And then Labor Day, they dropped it to $249,000. And the beginning of November, the listing expired, and I got the phone call.
Okay.
So one of the questions I always like to ask is, well, what's the situation? The gentleman says, well, it was a house that my wife inherited, and would really just like to sell it.
Right.
I said, well, great. I go, well, it was on the market for 6 months. Did you get many showings? Did you have any offers? He goes, no. I go, great, I'm interested. When can I meet you over there?
Right.
And I went to meet the gentleman over there, and this house was, it's kind of funny, right? Because the house was impeccable. And when I say it was impeccable, I just mean it was owned by, somebody elderly that came from that generation where they took care of the things they had.
Right.
So despite the fact that it was horribly outdated, and by today's standard, in our world, people would say, it's all wrong. But I'm telling you, the little 2-inch or 4-inch square tiles in the bathroom were so shiny I could have shaved in them. It was unbelievable. And, that house would have been perfect for about 98% of the world. They'd give their left arm to have the opportunity to live in that house. Right. But in our area, we live in a place where people see that and go, it needs a lot of work. Right. So I was probably with the gentleman for a good, hour and a half. Come to find out, back in the day when, catalog sales were quite the thing, he was like the head guy of the entire Sears catalog division.
Wow.
And his wife has a marketing consultant company. Okay. So it's not like they're under-resourced. They live in a nice gated community out in the area. But they just had this house. They needed to get rid of it.
Sure.
So one of the things I try to do with people is be transparent. Mm-hmm. So I told them, well, frankly, I'm not going to live here. And at the end of the day, I'm looking to make a profit. This is what I do.
Right.
and I'd be happy to buy it. I think it's a nice house, and I think there's opportunity. And the guy said, well, how much do you think you'd want to pay for it? And I always like them to give me a number first, but I kind of already knew his number. It started at $300 and it ended at $250.
Right.
So I kind of got this icky feeling in my stomach, and I wasn't sure how to stammer it out when I go, maybe somewhere around, I don't know, like 180, 185.
Okay.
And he goes, all right, well, let me talk to my wife about it when she gets home. Normally I like to try to wrap things up on location, but it was during the day and his wife wasn't home and it was her family house, so he wanted to talk to her.
Sure.
Sure enough, he called me back probably at 6:30 that night.
Right.
And he goes, hey, I talked to my wife about the house. He goes, do you think you can do the 185? I go, sure. And at that point, I dropped everything. I said, can I come over and, let's get it all wrapped up. And
right.
I went over to their house, sat at the kitchen table, wrote it all up at 185, brought it home. I had taken a bunch of pictures while I was there, put it all together, sent it out to my buyer's list, and within 24 hours of sending that out, I had a non-refundable cashier's check for $2,500 and had it sold for $215,000.
Wow. That's a great deal.
Yeah, that was a great deal.
Cool.
And everybody was happy.
Yeah, well, so was there end motivation more than just the fact they had a house that they were sitting on? I mean, was it they wanted to go buy a condo in Marco Island, Florida or something? Or what was their plan with the money? Do you know?
That's funny you asked that. Normally I ask that question.
Yeah.
I always like to ask people, hey, what are you going to do with the money?
Right.
Because once they tell me, then I continue to, I keep punching it like the monkey on the cocaine machine, right? But I didn't ask him that. It didn't seem to be a thing. It was really just, we've got this house, we want to stop thinking of it. We just want to get rid of it.
Sure.
And money wasn't an object, so I don't think whether he got $10,000 or $20,000 less mattered.
Right.
But, I would say this to any of the realtors that are listening to this show, Joe, is that I think so oftentimes these opportunities that come my way are because realtors don't ask the right questions. I think they often make a lot of assumptions, like they want to get top dollar for it.
Sure.
Not everybody wants to get top dollar.
Right.
Sometimes people just want to get rid of things.
Absolutely.
And
that's why garage sales exist.
That's right.
Not that a house is comparable, but I guess it is the mentality of a person selling something.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. That was a good story, and I think that gives a pretty good idea of, well, we didn't finish it, actually. So you had it under contract for $215,000 with a new buyer who I assume is an investor that was buying it?
The buyer was an investor.
And what was his plan with the property?
Her plan?
Her plan with the property. His or her plan with the property?
I could have went with it, but we got to keep it right.
Right.
It was to rehab it and resell it.
So they were going to fix and flip it.
They were.
Did you know at the time what the after repaired value of the property would be when you were wholesaling it? Was that part of your marketing?
Yes.
What did you think it was?
Well, one of the things that I'm very careful about, and when it comes to wholesaling properties, people that are marketing these type of properties, and again, we're not selling properties because I'm not a realtor, so I'm really not selling a property. I'm basically selling a contract.
Right.
I have an interest in the property, and I'm going to sell that.
Perfect.
But at the same time, we want to know what the said property might be worth, and so that's a little easier for everyone to agree on because that's just a matter of pulling comps and seeing what's sold in the neighborhood, and that's the easy part. The difficult part comes as to what the repairs are.
Okay.
So it's been my experience that wholesalers tend to downplay the repairs, and an experienced rehabber or flipper always plans for the
the worst.
They plan for the worst, and so it's very difficult to really nail the numbers because it depends who's doing the work. Is some guy and his two sons going to take this on as a summer job so they have the cost of materials and they're going to do most of the work themselves, and while their time has value, they don't value that the same as somebody else. There might be a newer investor that makes a couple phone calls to contractors in a phone book, and they're essentially going to pay retail prices to have work done, And then you have experienced flippers that have crews and agreed pricing on so much a square foot to do projects. And, so I find it difficult. I normally like people to kind of figure up what their own pricing is going to be to get the house rehabbed. I try to give some general things, but I'm very clear to say, don't take my numbers to heart. Just because I said this is going to cost $60,000, it might cost somebody, $45,000, and it might cost somebody else $80,000.
Do you ever have a contractor that you're familiar with walk through a property before you start marketing to give a better idea of what those repairs are? I'm just asking.
I mean, I do that if I think it's a property I'm going to keep for myself.
Sure.
But I don't want to intentionally waste people's time that I work with on pricing out jobs they're not going to get.
Right.
So I don't.
And this is a question related to that question. I've heard that there's some rules of thumb regarding rehabbing a property. And even in the meetup we were at the other night, one of the guests of the meetup mentioned a per square foot estimate of, you can gut out any house for X number of dollars per square foot. Have you ever heard anything like that as far as a rule of thumb?
I have. And actually, it's what I personally use. If it's mostly cosmetic, I usually figure it's going to run in the neighborhood of $20 to $25 a square. If it's going to be a full gut rehab, about $35 a square foot. And that number is interior only. So in other words, if it's going to need a roof, that's going to be an add-on. If it needs a new driveway, that's an add-on.
Right.
If it needs new siding, that's an add-on. Windows, that can kind of be negotiable. Sometimes you can wiggle the windows into the scope of the work with your contractor.
Okay. So back to the original part of the question. You had it under contract for $215,000 with a fix and flipper. Tell us the rest of the story. How did that work out?
So I had to go ahead and get transactional funding to close the deal at the 185, and that closed, and this didn't really go the way it probably should have. Normally these things you like to have happen like back to back, like an hour apart kind of thing. And the way this thing worked out, it actually, one closed like on a Wednesday, and the second one didn't close until Thursday.
Okay. So
it was a day apart.
We can talk about that for a second. For the listeners, what is transactional funding? Tell us how that worked.
Well, I didn't have $185,000 in my back pocket that day. At that time, I was kind of mentoring and coaching along another young aspiring investor in the way of wholesaling. And his dad is a rehabber himself and has a friend that he has access to that person's money.
Right.
So, this young kid essentially asked his dad, hey, we need $185,000. And looking back, he wired it in. Nobody signed for anything. It was purely, here's $185,000. I mean, frankly, I probably could have, said I quit real estate and just moved to Iowa or something. But it all worked out fine. Okay.
So you closed the deal the next day, made a nice, healthy profit. And the rehabber, did you ever follow up and see what happened on the back end of that deal? Do you have any idea what happened to the property and what it sold for?
The movie ended badly, Joe. I should have picked a different story.
Well, that's something to point out, though, because sometimes these opportunities don't always work out.
Frankly, the whole deal, aside from the fact that I made a nice profit, the back end of it saddens me because it was sold to somebody that I knew not real well, but fairly well at this point, and has had a really good relationship for a long time with a really good realtor over in that market. And this was like the second deal that I tried to do with this person. The first time, I actually got to this buyer through the realtor because I was calling realtors asking them if they had any cash buyers in the area on a different deal.
Okay.
And this realtor says, I got a buyer that'll buy it, but she's in Jamaica. And I go, well, first deposit money gets it. And so she ended up not getting that house. So we always joked about how she lost out on that one. I go, well, I'm calling you first on this one kind of thing.
Right.
And as it turns out, the realtor got involved in the project for some reason with her rehab guy and was making a bunch of recommendations on how she thought it should go.
Right.
So she completely spent too much money. It caused strife between the two of them. And what was a really solid, not only business relationship, but personal friendship, kind of went sideways as a result of this deal. Yeah. So the house did get sold. There was a little profit made, nowhere near what it should have been. Oh. And ended up canceling the listing with said agent over it because it wasn't.
Disagreements.
It just got bad in the end, but the house did sell and the investor did not lose money. That's the good thing.
Right.
But while you wouldn't draw it up this way on paper, I think I made more money not doing any work at all than the rehabber did actually flipping the property.
Right.
I mean, obviously it doesn't work out that way, and that's not the way you draw it up. But, I mean, I guess what we're talking about here is what really goes on.
Absolutely.
We could come up with a bunch of flowery stories where everybody makes a bunch of money and everything ends perfectly, but, that's not the real world, and this is a prime example of sometimes how good intentions don't end up, like you expected.
Thanks for sharing that story. So let's change gears a little bit. How many deals are you doing now on a monthly basis on average as a wholesaler, let's say? And then maybe we can talk a little bit more about your fix and flipping and...
Yeah, so, an average thing, this isn't like an absolute full-time thing for me, but it's really just a function of where the opportunities are and being willing to try new things. So it's not... this isn't a chest-pounding session to tell you how many deals I've done and how successful I am. But what I will tell you is that I have done such a wide variety of deals. I've done wholesale deals. I have done lease option deals, a handful of those. I got in the middle of the seller finance deal, a beautiful seller finance deal, and I just basically, kind of wholesaled that over to him.
Okay.
So I've done that. And most recently, in an effort to be open to almost any kind of opportunity if I think it makes sense, I bought a double-wide trailer in a mobile home park.
There you go.
So we don't know how the movie's going to end on that yet, but stay tuned.
No, that's pretty cool. Can you talk a little bit about that seller finance deal you mentioned? Just so maybe, again, if somebody's new to the business, they can get an idea of how seller financing could work, or maybe just talk about how you wholesaled it, because that's kind of interesting.
Absolutely. And, this kind of goes back to what I said earlier about realtors not necessarily asking the right questions, and I think sometimes wholesalers or other investors can fall into that same trap, and I know I probably have. But for some reason, when I went to go see this house, the situation was that the gentleman lived in southern Illinois. The house was up here in the Chicagoland area. His daughter lived like 2 blocks away, and then recently had a baby a couple years ago. So the whole idea was he wanted to have a house up here so he could come and stay for a couple weeks at a time and not be an imposition to his daughter and son-in-law, which was probably a good decision on his part.
Right.
But he had this house, and so he called me off of a bandit sign, and he was looking to sell it. So I went over to look at it, and we spent about 2 hours together. Kind of a long story. I'm a stage 4 head and neck cancer survivor, and he had some medical stuff as well, so we kind of found that as a common ground to bond on, rather. So we talked for a while about all that stuff, and eventually we got back to, so what do you want to do with the house? He goes, well, I want to sell it. I go, all right, great. I go, well, we're halfway there. You want to sell a house? I want to buy a house. All we got to do is come up with the price.
Right.
So we laughed it up about that a little bit, and ultimately I was looking to, try to pay about $100,000 for it. I thought it was probably going to be worth maybe $150 kind of thing. Originally, I thought about holding it as a rental property, but it was an older home, and while it was in decent shape, it was like 2 bedrooms and a bath, and you had to climb up about 8 stairs to get to the front door, and there was a lot of what I call negative factors associated with the property for that reason. So we got talking about it, and I said, hey, let me ask you a question. Are you looking for all the money right now so you can pay Uncle Sam all the taxes? Or maybe what you're just looking for is a steady paycheck for the next X amount of time? He goes, well, what do you have in mind? And so I started doing the math backwards. I figured, well, this house will probably rent for probably $1,300 or $1,400 a month. The taxes are $300 a month. And I need to make a little cash flow in the middle. I said, what if I gave you, say, $700 a month for the next 10 years, and then just a balloon payment of what's left at that point in time? He goes, we could probably do something like that.
Nice.
And then he hesitates. He goes, hey, wait a minute. He goes, how much interest am I going to get? I said, how much interest do you want? He goes, what do you mean? I go, well, at the end of the day, I'm only going to pay you $100,000 for the house. So it's either $100,000 and I'll pay you $700 a month, which is actually just going to come right off the principal. So when you talk about paying down the principal, that would have went really fast. I said, or if you want to impress your buddies, you can sell me the house for $20,000 and I'll pay you like 17% interest. But at the end of the day, it's still going to be $100,000.
Right.
He goes, oh, okay, well, yeah, that makes sense. So he went home, talked to his wife about it. He goes, yeah. He goes, let's do it.
So you did a deal at $100,000, 0% interest.
0% interest, nice. $700. He didn't say let's do it. The balloon payment at 10 years would have been $16,000.
Wow. Okay, so you were paying that down. Yeah.
And he said, hey, if we do this, do you think the balloon payment at the end can be $20,000? Sure.
Right.
Absolutely it can be. As a buy and hold rental property, in retrospect, that would have been a great one to have, because if you're going to pay down $700 a month,
right, that's huge,
off the principal. I mean, even if I would have just held it for 5 years and then turned around and listed it and sold it retail,
right,
there could have been a really nice spread there.
Sure.
That I could have had a renter pay for those 5 years.
And you said you ended up wholesaling that to someone else?
I did. I have a guy that knows I do some real estate stuff. He wanted to know if I had any houses available, and he needed a house, and his credit's not so good, and blah, blah, blah. And I go, yeah, I got a place for you.
Yep.
So I think I signed the contract to him for $5,000.
Oh, okay. So then he took over your position at that point and is paying, we'll say currently is paying the $700 a month. And
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Great. So
and I haven't heard from the seller that that's not working out.
Right.
And I see him on a fairly regular basis, and he hasn't told me that everybody's happy.
That's great. Where was that house at? I'm just curious.
It was locally here in Algonquin.
In Algonquin?
Yeah.
Wow, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's Illinois.
Yes, we're based out of Chicagoland area of Illinois. All right, so at one point we were talking about you going out marketing these properties. There's a couple points I just wanted to clarify. You mentioned selling contracts and selling properties, and you mentioned real wholesaling is owning the property. What I wanted to kind of elaborate on is, from my understanding of wholesaling, you can only market a contract on a property for sale and whatever the price of that contract is to another investor if you're going to do it legitimately. Is that a fair statement?
I think so.
Yeah?
I believe that to be true, yeah.
Right. And then when you're actually completing a double closing, you're physically going to own that property. So it also falls under the realm of true wholesaling as well, because you technically are owning that property, even if it is only for 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. So you're selling the property to another investor. So the difference, I guess I'm trying to get at, is there's a lot of people that are getting into real estate investing that start off with wholesaling because it seems to be the most time and cost-effective way to get involved. And they start marketing. Let's say they get one under contract via a bandit sign, which is what you mentioned on your last 2 deals. So it sounds like that's a great way to find some opportunities. Then they'll get a property under contract for, let's say, $100,000, and they're actually marketing the property maybe at $110,000 or $105,000, but that could potentially create some problems if anyone were to open up those books and ask questions because they're not a licensed broker. Is that what you were?
Yeah, I mean, what we say in groups of investors and how we loosely throw terms around is one thing, but how we talk to home sellers and to the public at large is, I'm not in the business of putting buyers and sellers together. Mm-hmm. That's what licensed real estate brokers do. Right. And I'm not one, so that right. isn't what I do. I try to be transparent in the fact of my intention with sellers. Sometimes they get the sense in talking to other investors that they're afraid the deal's going to go sideways, so they try to treat the seller like a mushroom, keep them in the dark and feed them shit. And
I love it.
I just try to be a stand-up guy, and I try to be honest with people largely. And I simply tell them, I say, listen, I like this property, and I think that myself and some of the investors I work with, this is kind of right in their wheelhouse. But if I don't end up closing on this house myself personally, as long as you get the $72,000 that we've agreed on, does it really matter if I close and give you the $72,000, or as long as somebody does? And I've never had anybody say, oh, no, if you don't buy it, then forget it.
Right.
They go, as long as they get to $72,000. And I tend to be kind of the king of analogies, so particularly if I'm speaking to, an older woman, I say, and the reason I tell you that, I go, think about, in the past, if you ever went shopping for a Christmas dress, and maybe you found a beautiful dress at some store, and you brought it home, and you hung it in the closet, and then ironically, a couple weeks later, you're out shopping, and you find a dress that you like better.
Right.
Well, I realize in today's day, we'd keep them both, but there was probably a time where people were a little tighter with their money, and if they weren't going to wear the first dress, they would take that one back to the store and return it and keep the new one that they like better. Right? And they go, oh, yeah. I go, well, that could be the situation here. Today, I love your house. This is terrific. But what about 2 weeks from now if I phone on, I like even better? And I don't have unlimited supply of money, so if I personally think I want the other one more than I want yours, I don't want to let you down because I know you're counting on getting this house sold, so I may pass it off to, one of my friends or, other people I know that are looking for these type of properties. Is that okay with you? And they go, well, sure. And then I remind them that my ultimate goal in this thing is somehow to make a profit.
Right.
I have hobbies, but this isn't it, right?
Right.
So I'm looking to make a little profit, and it's important that they know that up front, because if you're going to do a contract assignment, Illinois is an attorney state. So in some states where you just go close at a title company, this may not come up. These attorneys here locally, they feel the need to go through that HUD with their client and tell them what all the charges are. Right. So eventually they go down the line, they go, oh, no, what's this $8,000 here?
Right.
And the attorney goes, oh, well, that's the money that person that you sold the house to, yeah, they went ahead and assigned that contract to somebody else, and they made $8,000. And if you didn't talk about that at the time, right, remind them that your intention is, in fact, to make a profit, and that you may not keep it, you might give it to somebody else. I've never had it happen because I don't ever allow the opportunity for it to go there. Mm-hmm. But I can only imagine, and I'm sure over time maybe one of your other guests will be able to tell a nice story of when they got to the closing table and there was a $8,000 or $10,000 contract assignment, and the seller went, oh, no, that's, because sometimes you're buying a house for $25,000. Right. If they're selling a property for $25,000 and they see I'm going to make $10,000, right, I don't know, that might anger some people.
Right, it might.
It's possible. So I want to talk about that up front, because if that's going to be a problem, let's talk about it on the front end. I don't want to waste buyers' time and my time and preparing it and making calls and emailing it to people and showing the property. I don't want to go through all that work only to have a blow up at the end. Right. So let's clear the table on that at the beginning, and then we're ready to move forward.
Well, that sounds like a great way to run the wholesaling side of the business, though. Mm-hmm. Being upfront and honest.
I think so.
Great.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and cut that episode a little bit shorter because it actually extends for over an hour. What a great episode 4. Special thanks to Dan Clarton for coming in and interviewing on our Investor Empowerment Radio podcast. Stay tuned for part 2 of that episode, which is going to be episode 5, coming out in the next week or two. As always, special thanks to all the police, firefighter, and veterans out there that make this world a better place. Please visit us at www.investorempowermentradio.com and like us on iTunes and Stitcher. Stay tuned till next week. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Investor Empowerment Series radio show. Be sure to tune in next week for another empowering episode. We welcome your feedback, so please rate us on iTunes and Stitcher, and visit us at www.investorempowermentchicago.com or TanisGroupRealty.com.